from PHLY. Zach, welcome back to Philly Pressbox Radio.
What's going on? Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, let's get right to it. As we said, you've been covering it. You've been writing about this team. It just feels weird that it's a playoff week because it certainly doesn't feel like a playoff week. No excitement for a lot of fans. Did you realize at the end of November when the Eagles were 10-1 that there were a lot of flaws? And how did it get so bad since then?
Well, I saw when they were 10-1 that they weren't dominating opponents, right? If you look at their point differential, which is often a good indicator of how good a team is per se, they were not high at the point differential. So you kind of looked at it and you said that there are some flaws here. But no, I certainly did not see them losing 5 of 6 games. Actually, one of the things that I really pointed to then was the strength of schedule, and they were beating really difficult teams. They beat the Dolphins, they beat the Chiefs, they beat the Bills, they beat the Cowboys. And I certainly expected the 49ers to be tough and Dallas on the road to be tough. But I looked at those last 3 games in the schedule, Giants, Arizona, Giants, as a chance to get right going in the postseason. So the fact that the Eagles have played this way during the past 3 weeks is particularly problematic.
Yeah, I'm with you too, Zach. We talked about this back before that 6-game run, and we all thought, I think, hey, you come out of this 4-2, you're good. You knew going to Dallas was going to be tough. You knew going to Kansas City was going to be tough. Those were the 2 I thought they would lose, but certainly would rebound and win the next 3. And boy, it just seems like each week it got worse.
Yeah, certainly these past 3 games are the ones that jump out, and the defense especially. I think the offense is a part of it, but the defense especially, the move to Matt Patricia backfired in the sense that they don't really have a good sense of who they are, what their identity is. They're not getting to the quarterback. They're not coordinated in coverage on the back end. The linebackers, they have personnel issues there. So at all 3 levels, you're looking at it and you're saying they're out of sorts. And I did think those last 3 games were a chance to get right. And instead, they're going into the playoffs with the least amount of momentum one can imagine.
We need to talk about Jalen Hurts. He definitely regressed this year as far as what the stats will show and what the eye test shows also. He seemed to have trouble picking up the blitzes, especially over the latter part of the season. What's going on with Jalen Hurts?
Well, I think overall he's been solid, but certainly not spectacular. It wasn't the year he had last year. It's hard to have that MVP level pace every season, but I do think that he hasn't been consistent enough for them. And I think some of it's been, when he was dealing with the knee injury in particular, he wasn't running as effectively, and the running's a big part of his game. But a lot of it, like you mentioned, is the blitz. But if I'm trying to identify the biggest issue, it's been the turnovers, right? Last year, he did a good job taking care of the ball. They were able to sustain drives. They were able to finish drives. And this year, they're just turning the ball over at such a high rate, and it's affecting everything they're doing offensively. And not all of them are on Jalen, but a lot of them are on Jalen. And in particular, some of the interceptions, some of the fumbles. So that's where, if there's anything he needs to clean up, if he turned over the ball less, he's too good a player, and he has too many weapons around him that if they were able to sustain drives, those numbers would look a lot different. You'd see more passing touchdowns. He broke he broke the franchise record in touchdowns. A lot of it had to do with the quarterback sneaks at the 1-yard line, but still, I think you'd see a lot more passing touchdowns if they were able to sustain drives more than they have.
Hey, Zach, they came out with an article today about the snap counts. So I want to talk a minute about the defense. Nicholas Morrow at linebacker played 72% of the snap counts the whole entire season. He got cut from the 53-man roster. And Zach Cunningham played 62%. He was second. He wasn't signed until after training camp started on August the 6th. These are your 2 linebackers. Obviously, they were dependent on the Kobe Dean, that didn't work out. He was third at 16%, way down. So Morrow and Cunningham is where they had to hang their hat, and that didn't work well.
No, a lot of it had to do with the fact that Nakobe Dean was the focal point of their plan at linebacker, and they drafted him in the 3rd round, the highest draft capital they've spent on a linebacker since Michael Kendricks in 2012. They let they let TJ Edwards and Kaiser White leave with the hope that Nakobe Dean would be their top guy, and for good reason. I mean, he was a standout at Georgia, but too often injured this season. Was injured week 1, then injured midseason. And so they weren't able to get consistent play from him. And without Dean, it changed the complexion of that group. Now, Nicholas Morrow did not make the team out of training camp. So the fact that they're relying on him shows the nature of the injuries. I thought if Dean could have fulfilled their potential or the potential that they saw in him, and Zach Cunningham, had he been healthy throughout the year, I think that would have been a decent combination. They just never had that throughout the season. And that's been a problem. And frankly, linebacker is not a spot that they invest in. And it's their organizational philosophy, right? They're going to invest in their defensive front. They're going to invest in their corners, and they're going to try to get by on, player personnel and scouting and development at the linebacker spot. So some years it works like it did last year. Other years you get what you pay for. And I think this year, more than anything, they're getting what they're paying for there.
Darius Slay confirmed on social media today that he will be back this coming Monday night. I think all the O-line guys are reasonably healthy. Hopefully Jalen Hurts' finger is okay. Are they going into this game at least reasonably healthy?
I wouldn't frame it that way. Now, they're healthier than some of the other teams going into the playoffs, but A.J. Brown is he had a scare last week. We'll see how he looks this week. Devontae Smith, similarly, coming back from injury. Cam Jurgens, Reed Blankenship, both left the game early last week. So, I mean, Sidney Brown's out for the year now, torn ACL. Yeah. So they do have injuries. Now, it's not like 2017 where they're down there starting left tackle and one of their top offensive weapons and their middle linebacker, and you go on down the list. But they need AJ and Devontae to be as healthy as possible to win this game on Monday night.
Hey, Zach, I got to stick to the defensive side. Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, the last, I'll call it 2/3 of a season, have kind of disappeared or not been good. We'll look at it however you want to look at it. They got a lot of work, probably a lot more than they expected. And Fletcher Cox ended up with way more work than he expected. What do we make of that interior push that was so dominant in the first third of the season? It just wasn't that good in the second half.
Yeah, I think it's frankly been consistent on the edges too, right? Their defensive front hasn't been productive in the back half of the year. Josh Sweat doesn't have a sack since the bye week. Mm-hmm. I wish I could put my finger on it because those are good players. And the reality is, for the amount of snaps they're playing, for the amount of close games that they're in, right? It's not as if teams are just running it's not just as if teams are not passing the ball. They're getting teams in the third and longs. They're getting teams in third downs. The pass rush should be better. And then you mentioned Jordan Davis. He should anchor that run defense, and that run defense has been weak. I think some of it's scheme related, but a lot of it has to be put on the players. They're not playing well enough, and that's what it comes down to. And Josh Sweat has said it's been a season of almosts, and when it's a season of almosts, there's no stat column for almost. So I think that's the biggest issue, honestly, is they're not playing well enough. But what's the reason? If they knew the reason, they would have figured this out week 10, week 12, week 15, week 18, because this has been going on the backstretch of the schedule. And when the defense is good, the defensive front's good. If you go back and you watch that game against the Bucs week 3, the Eagles defense played outstanding that night. And Jalen Carter might have been the best player on the field. And across the board, they were getting to the quarterback. So if that defensive front can play the way that you would like to think they can, this defense would be much better. They simply haven't done that.
Well, Zach, it's been a hot topic on Sports Talk Radio all week. Is Nick Sirianni perhaps coaching for his job? If they come up short and look awful Monday night, would the Eagles consider making a change for, a guy who has led them to 3 straight postseason appearances? Could they do that?
Well, it's an interesting question because the premise of the question seems ridiculous to me. And for the reason you said, he's brought the team to 3 straight playoffs. They were in the Super Bowl last year, double-digit wins this year. But the way the season's ending is, catastrophic. And I don't think that's hyperbole to put it that way. To lose 5 of 6 games, to lose the way they did against Arizona, to come out the way they did against the Giants. I think a lot's riding on this Tampa Bay game, not necessarily the result, but how they respond. If this game looks like the past 2, it's going to be hard to really say, well, look what they did in November, right? Look what they did in September. High leverage games late in the year, for you to collapse that way, I think what's more likely to happen is there are major staff changes, right? But I keep thinking back to when Doug Peterson was fired. And Jeffrey Lurie, I thought he was fairly honest that day. He said, this is not about deserve. Doug Peterson did not deserve to be fired, but they had a difference in vision, right? I don't think Nick Sirianni, if they lose 100-0 this weekend, I don't think he deserves to be fired based on resume, based on credentials, based on what he's done over 3 years. But if you're looking at it like, what's your confidence level in the franchise going forward and the fitness of the head coach going forward? That's more the question than deserve, than credentials. So that's the best way I can answer it. I know that's not giving you a firm yes or no, but the reality is a lot of it depends on how they look because of the way they've looked these past 3 weeks in particular.
Yeah. And what you just said it better than the article I read, but that's what Mike Vrabel got fired for, is exactly what you just said. The vision's different. It's not that he can't coach, and he hasn't been a really good coach, but they moved on. They just wanted a new voice and to move. Hey, I have one final question for you on the defensive side. Chet mentioned Darius Slay going to be back. He's a good player, and he needs to be, because Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are good receivers. Do you see the defensive scheme changing a whole lot now that you can insert a Pro Bowl type player in Slay back in there and give you some ability to do some other things with these young kids?
Well, for their sake, they should hope that Slay's the difference here, because they've looked awful these past 3 games. But I don't think you're going to see as much of Ringo and Ricks in there. Unless they move Maddox over to like a safety role and you want to get Ricks in the slot with Roby. Perhaps they do something like that. But no, you're going to have Bradbury and Slay, and that's what you're going to hang your hat on. Slay's a high-level player who's going to be healthier now, post-surgery, you would hope. And we haven't seen Slay in this Patricia defense. But it's hard for me to say that Slay is going to be the solution to everything, because they've just been that inconsistent and that bad, frankly, during these recent weeks.